Episode 4.5. Casey. The menagerie's last 2 weeks of approach were fraught with sleepless nights and cramped backs. Both crew and passengers were worked to the bone in preparation for yet another time of trade. For most crew, it was a period of vague jubilee, as the prospect of making profit and being allowed off their rigs loomed ever nearer. For the passengers, it was a feeling of relief, that they not only had survived weeks of difficult labor, but that they had also reached their destination in, more or less, one piece. For Casey, it was a time of grueling mental training. Under the icy watch of Dr. Diana Ingram, he learned more about genetics than he would have thought possible. To be fair, Casey did have some advantages. While not strictly a geneticist, he had grown up under Neil's dome. To them, manipulating genetics was as second nature as using electricity. Not everyone was a specialist, but most members of the dome community got the finer concepts behind it. They used the Medi-tree, as Diana called it, to do most of the work, directing its actions with a wireless control panel that had been set up just outside the quarantine cell. Diana walked Casey through how to operate the device and read its outputs. Casey called on knowledge from his youth, dusting off old memories from his time studying the Neil's Dome educational curriculum. He had never made it to macro-level organisms, but as a teen he had once sequenced the genes of several tardigrades. This, he found, was little different. It simply took longer and had a few more steps. Diana had more to offer than just her own expertise as well. At the start of their second week working together, she brought out a small book. Upon opening it, Casey realized what it was immediately. It was genetic artisan notes. Reverential wonder warred against a feeling of intimate violation within him. "I've never held artisan notes before," Casey said, voice hard. "Almost no one in the dome is even allowed to know these exist. There's no way the sisters let you have this. I don't care what you traded for it." He could feel the weight of its knowledge, saved from before the Inferno days. The dome's genetic artisans were the most highly trained specialists. They supposedly worked right under the Neil sisters, learning from and adding to the preserved notes of Dr. Sandra Neil herself. "Who said anything about trading?" Diana asked, clearly annoyed that he had been reading over her shoulder. "Then how?" Casey began, but she cut him off. "All I can say to you, Mr. Howell, is that we've always been good at collecting information." Casey wanted to pursue this further, but decided not to. Upon reflection, he realized that it wasn't really too shocking. The suppliers traded information as much as anything else. Still, the thought of them collecting what was supposed to be such hidden information made Casey wonder exactly how these people operated. For a moment, he pictured something like a fungus, mycelia spreading undetected through the root systems of surrounding plants. Were the suppliers like this? Laying out feelers in every community, not spreading their influence but rather gathering information? And why not? Was it not the will of all life to save information? Wasn't that exactly why they all but worshipped the double helix under Neil's dome? On the last evening he had aboard the Skunk Babe, Casey sat with Ingram and Diana in the hospital's only conference room. He hadn't left the hospital the whole time he'd been there, Ingram not wanting word of Casey's survival to spread farther than absolutely necessary. Casey didn't understand the reasoning behind it, but had no option but to go along with things. The conference room's lights were dim. 3D images of the killer and his DNA projecting themselves up from the table at which they sat all casted the room in a pale blue glow. One word bannered its way across the top of the display. Thalmus. "How do you know his name is Thalmus?" Ingram asked. "Did he have it written on his underwear or something?" "No, Much simpler than that, Diana responded. He had it tattooed on himself. It was well hidden and written in a way that only someone who works within the dome would be able to read. She looked at Casey, who nodded in agreement. A flash of avarice kindled behind Ingram's eyes, perhaps intrigued at the hidden system of writing. Diana, thankfully, moved the conversation along. Our friend here was, at one point, a baseline human, she said. That much is clear, but look, things have been grafted onto the structure of his DNA. He can see in incredibly low light. He can also see, with clarity, a distance that you or I would need to look through a telescope to achieve. Many of his features, in fact, remind me of that of a bird's. Birds? Ingram asked, fascination in his voice. Those small garbage peckers? You'd think, wouldn't you, that a genetically modified killer might opt for something more, intimidating. Neil's dome has records of some pretty monstrous pre-inferno creatures, Casey said, shrugging. One flightless species grew to be taller than a man and could run 40 miles an hour. It had a kick strong enough to cave in a skull as well. Ingram's eyebrows rose in appreciation at this. But that is not the only reason, Diana said. On a hunch, I took images of his brain. Look. She pulled up the scan of the killer's brain. It was an interwoven mesh of highlighted red and green strands, each conjoining on a starburst. The green is normal human brain tissue. The red is avian, Diana said. I think that's to help process some of the information from his advanced senses. Think of it as a supporting lattice of rebar pushed through concrete to make it stronger. Why do something this extreme? Ingram asked. Couldn't a human brain handle all that stuff? Yes, of course, Diana responded, but nowhere near as efficiently. She turned toward Casey, looking for him to continue the explanation. This was to see if he had learned anything under her tutelage. It's like this, Casey said, racking his brain to recall how Diana had explained it to him. Humans evolved to process information from our particular senses. Using enhanced senses would be like learning to use any other tool. It would take practice. For Thalamus, on the other hand, its use would be second nature. Because he has this network of bird neurons, his brain's baseline pathways are supported. There would be other benefits as well. Such as? Diana pressed. Such as bird neurons use less energy than ours. Ingram sat silent, momentarily dumbfounded by the horrible simplicity and elegance of what was staring at him. What about this mummy act he has going on? Ingram asked. Birds don't do that, do they? He's got more than bird going on inside him, Diana said. There are some creatures that can stay dormant for years, either expelling or replacing the water inside their bodies. So he could go some time like this. Ingram gestured at the 3D model of the killer on his bed. It is impossible to really say, Diana responded. This man's genetic code has been messed with in ways I did not think were possible, even after reading the dome's artisan notes. To be honest, I would like at least another year to study this creature. Think of the profit that such information would yield us. He's already been promised, Di, Ingram said. Yes, my husband, the deal-maker, Diana replied, voice mute of all inflection. While they spoke, Casey used the desk's controls. After a moment of fumbling, he managed to pull up a live feed of the cell. He watched the killer's projected image. The thing seemed as close to dead as someone could get, and yet the shadows of his eyes were the smoldering hearts of dead stars, dark wells of malignant promise. For a moment, Casey felt watched by the genetic chimera of a man, as if the eyes flickered subtly within their sunken sockets. He blinked, and they were once again lifeless pits with no trace of movement. His head felt as though it was filled with radio static. How much time had passed while he zoned out? "I think I need sleep," Casey said, forcing himself to stand on watery legs. "Sure, Case," Ingram said. "You sounded good, by the way. Very convincing. Just don't forget what Dai taught you between now and when we meet with the Adiraks." "Don't worry, Manager Ingram. I got it," Casey said, tapping the side of his head with one finger. He turned and held out a hand to Diana. "Dr. Ingram, thank you for teaching me." She shook his hand, polite but disinterested as always. As he left the room, Ingram called after him. "Set an alarm. We leave before sunrise." "Will do," Ingram said without turning around. None of them, not even Casey, noticed what he held in his hand as the door to the conference room closed behind him. Diana. Diana sat in the Skunk Babe's cab, her hands sweating as she used twin joysticks to guide its treads along the barren, rocky terrain. Lavina was ahead of them now, so close she could almost reach through the windshield and grab its massive polyhedral towers. They were each of them different, no two designed to look exactly alike. One was shaped like a smooth-sided pyramid. Another was a latticed work of chrome and crystal that refracted light so spectacularly she could almost hear it. Fungus-like clouds brooded and rumbled above the phantasmagorical cityscape, lashing at the city with persistent rain and strikes of lightning. Diana wasn't sure if the scene made her nauseous or indescribably exultant, but something deep in her brainstem itched if she stared at the city for too long. It was better to keep an eye on the instruments. Radar, sighting lasers, and cameras that covered almost every spectrum were embedded at key angles along the Skunk Babe's egg-shaped frame. Every rig in the convoy was set up in the same way. Dozens of screens surrounded her. At one point, each rig's onboard computer had been used to compile the raw data and synthesize it on the screens as images humans could understand without trying. This miraculous tech had made it through the Inferno days and had survived to the time of Diana's great-grandfather. But sometime between then and now it had stopped working. No one could fix it, so no one talked about it. Eventually, the convoy just went on without it. The screens displayed raw data, sprinting columns of pixels. Generating a purely mental model of the data was something that only 0.05% of the supplier population could do. Not because of any innate talent they had, but simply due to splitting headaches that came as part of the package. Diana was one of the few who found it oddly meditative. It also gave her an excuse to be away from other people for prolonged periods of time. She had come to depend on this solitude more frequently over the past year, seeking peace from the endless needs of the various rigs' managers. When they couldn't get in touch with Ingram, it became her responsibility to fill in the gap. More often, however, she was simply sent to find him. It was maddening, as though she were his secretary rather than his wife and head of the medical division. Even though he was the trade manager and it was his damn job to be available at all times, even though he had built his power base on having a personal touch around the convoy, even though it was she herself who'd given him the necessary leverage to be elected to his position in the first place. She gritted her teeth, nearly losing her mental model of the menagerie as these thoughts crashed into her. Despite the frustration, however, their system had worked. Ingram would go around, hear the complaints, and be seen as the man of the crew. He was, too, which made it all the easier. Then it would be Diana's advice and guidance behind the scenes that turned his good intentions into executable plans. Their first 10 years together had been both blissful and profitable. Diana allowed herself a smile at these memories. They were good ones, after all, and she knew there would be few of those to look forward to in the coming months. "Miss Di," a voice crackled in her ear. She recognized the voice of one of the lead engineers, but couldn't remember his name. "Miss Di, can you hear me?" "Concentrating," she said. "Yes, but Phil just took over the steering down here. It's safe for you to let go of the sticks." Diana gritted her teeth. "Why did he do that?" she asked, her voice free of the frustration coursing through her. "You did," the voice said. "You told us to alert you the moment Manager Ingram left, and he just has. You also told Phil to take over. Manager Ingram and the guest are on Lancer 102A. "Thank you," Diana said, releasing the twin joysticks and massaging her fingers. "Sorry for my tone. You know how it is when you're going manual." "Didn't even notice," the engineer said. "Your husband sends his love. He wants you to remember to vacuum seal the meat." Diana heaved a deep sigh as she thanked the engineer and disconnected. As if I would have forgotten, she thought. And to use such outdated terminology, vacuum seal the meat? Why didn't he vacuum seal some brains in his head? Her feet made no noise as she descended the stairs from the cab, following the well-remembered path into the quarantine cells of the hospital. On the final landing before the cells, a man stood in one of the few corners which, for the next 5 minutes, the security cameras would not reach. He was short and balding, the reddish crown of his head glistening with sweat, blazing spectacled eyes, one blue, one storm cloud gray, glared up at her, seeming to perch like 2 ping-pong balls on top of his narrow nose. A long gray beard dropped down from his face like ringlets of smoke. "Good to see you," the man said. "Adam," Diana said, "did you find what we need?" Adam was the manager of the Skunk Babe. Were it a ship at sea, he would be its captain, keeping up with the daily needs of the crew just as Diana and Ingram kept up with the needs of the convoy as a whole. "Yes, the buffoon has left?" Adam asked. "I'm here, aren't I?" Diana replied, her voice glacial. "And I will ask you to not talk about Ingram like that. He is still my husband." "Fine," Adam said. "I'll wait until this is all over, then I'll gloat." "And speak ill of the dead?" Diana asked, her eyes wide with fake shock. Adam smirked, his beard shifting with the change of expression. He held out his hand, presenting a cheap perfume bottle. "A scent for the lady," he said. "Be sure you have this sprayed on yourself, all over yourself, mind, or this won't work." "Yes, yes," Diana said, reaching out to take hold of the bottle. "I synthesized the stuff. I know how this works." As soon as her fingers wrapped around the small plastic bottle, Adam closed his hands around hers. "Now that Ingram is not going to be in the picture," his voice trailed off, the expectation lingering in the air like stale cologne. "Look, it is best to pull this bandage off now," Diana said, extruding her hand from Adam's too warm grip. "I am doing what is necessary for the convoy, but I still love that man." She bent down and kissed Adam on his feverish head, the taste of his salty sweat on her lips. "We've known each other for decades. If you really care about me, please allow me space to grieve." She knew he was in love with her. This, more than anything, had led to the bitterness he now felt towards her husband. As though in response to her thoughts, Adam's head turned an even more violent shade of red. "You know I will. I'd never—" He seemed to get flustered, then grew angry. "I've just never seen what his appeal is. Ingram's always been talented, but his selfishness has almost ruined us." He said this like a well-rehearsed speech, probably because it was. "He never had the right focus." "That is because you lack imagination," Diana said, no longer wishing to spare Adam's feelings. "In the right hands, he is beyond a capable leader. Let's not forget who it was that started trade with Lavina in the first place. Centuries of insular nationalism dissolved by his almost supernatural charm." "But the plan was yours, Di. He just took the credit." "Regardless, it never would have worked without him." She eyed Adam, considering her next words before continuing. "The man is about to die. Why can't you just be satisfied with that?" "I am," he said, a little too quickly. "But when I think of how much you fell into his shadow—" "Oh yes, poor little me," she said, cutting Adam off. "Just waiting for someone to come and rescue me from my big, bad, incompetent husband." Her voice was sharp, causing Adam to flinch back as though struck. He might be in love with her, but she knew his deepest desire. Adam was a man who, more than anything else, needed power. This made him a useful tool, but one which needed to be kept in its appropriate place. "Just remember that until the next election, I am the one in the big seat. You can have it once I'm done setting things right." She smiled, placing her hands on both of his shoulders and locking eyes. "Get in my way or become a distraction, and I will personally usher in your early retirement." She said this as if speaking to a slightly idiotic subordinate. This man was nearly old enough to be her father, and yet in all his time, Adam had never grown past more than his basic desire to have, well, more. Truly, he was the epitome of wasted talent. He began, but Diana again cut him off. "Go prepare a lancer for our guest to take," she said. "We're going to let him finish what he started, and you will finally get some payback." She watched as Adam disappeared up the stairs, wondering when he would need to be removed as well. 5 minutes later, she stood in the hospital room that held the assassin, Thalmus. She turned to make sure that no one had followed her into the hallway. It would not do to have someone learn the trade manager's override codes. It would break Ingram's heart to learn that she herself had stolen the codes, but if all went well, he wouldn't find out at all. She stepped in the room, entered the codes, and the polymer began to dissolve. As air and moisture filtered into the cell, she sprayed herself with the contents of the bottle Adam had given her. Originally designed under Neil's dome for the use of crowd control, the synthetic pheromone made changes to the brain chemistry of those around the wearer. It made them more open to suggestion, more obedient. She'd found it in the genetic artisan notes which she borrowed from the Neil sisters, but swore to never use it on Convoy Menagerie's crew or passengers. Things had changed, however. She needed to save the convoy. More immediately, she needed to control the killer Neil's dome sent after them. If he could be wielded, it would not only further her goals, but also save them from a potential war with one of their major trade partners. When the cell was properly aerated and Thalmus had regained the general appearance of a human, she opened the door and commanded the medical tree to wake him up. It was like turning the page of a flip book. 1 second he was lying with his eyes closed, the next he was standing, eyes locked onto hers. She had not seen him move. It is considered wisdom among the suppliers to know that, no matter how well one prepares or how lucky one purports to be, there will come a time when each person looks at their lives and asks, when had things gone wrong? Diana had never bothered with such weakness. She had laughed at this notion until she looked at those eyes. It took a conscious effort not to flinch. She worked at her mouth for a moment, temporarily speechless. A splinter of uncertainty worked its way into her thoughts. What was she doing, releasing this kind of a monster? But this was the only way. She called all of her resolve to bear as she spoke to the killer before her. Her tone was cold enough to shatter steel. Thalmus would take orders from her. You have been listening to Dead Arcology, written and recorded by me, Michael K. Ostis. If you enjoyed this story, please consider sharing it. I have episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Podbean, as well as several others. Updates, schedules, and news can be found on the website, deadarcology.com, as well as on the social media apps Blue Sky and Instagram under the username Dead Arcology. If you want to help Dead Arcology grow more directly, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/deadarcology. Thank you again for listening. It really helps a lot. I very much appreciate you giving this story your time, and I will see you in about 2 weeks. Goodbye.